Welcome to the Deep Dive, where I uploaded my transcript for the podcast and have two AI hosts talk about it. They may go into more depth than I went into. So without further ado, here's the Deep Dive.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to tackle a topic that I think we can all relate to at least a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
It's the need for external validation.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be taking a deep dive into this idea using an excerpt from the audio series, The Why of Things, to kind of guide us through the conversation.
Okay.
And we're going to be looking at what is it that makes us crave approval from other people? And what happens when that need starts to kind of take over in our lives?
I think it's a really fascinating topic.
Oh, yeah.
What I find interesting is that we all like to get a compliment here and there.
Right.
But for some people, that desire for outside approval becomes almost like this driving force.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just simply liking to get some positive feedback.
Right.
So let's start by defining exactly what we're talking about here.
Okay.
When we say external validation, what does that actually mean?
It's like you're outsourcing your self-worth and letting the opinions of other people dictate how you feel about yourself.
So it's not so much about having this strong internal compass of self-esteem.
Right.
It's about relying on others to define your worth.
Exactly.
And the source material really hits on the point that there's this big difference between enjoying compliments
Right.
and actually needing those compliments to feel good about yourself.
Yeah. Someone with healthy self-esteem can take a compliment,
Right.
appreciate it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't become the thing that determines their value.
Totally.
But for someone who is reliant on external validation, it's almost like they're getting a fix.
Yeah.
They need that praise and that approval in order to feel okay.
It's interesting because the source goes on to talk about how this need for external validation plays out in different personality types.
Yes.
And they use these acronyms to illustrate how it shows up in different people.
Yes.
And those acronyms are ID, ES, FD, EID, and DISD.
Right.
And it's good for us to understand what those acronyms stand for.
Sure.
So we're all on the same page.
Okay.
So ID stands for Impulsive Disregard Disorder, sometimes known as ASPD.
Right.
ESFD refers to Extreme Self-Focus Disorder, which is also known as NPD.
Okay.
EID is Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD.
Right.
And then finally, we have DASD, which is Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder,
Right.
sometimes known as HPD.
Okay. So are we going to start with ID?
Yeah, let's start there.
Okay.
What is it that makes this type so distinct when it comes to needing external validation?
Someone with ID often seeks validation through power and control. They have a strong need for dominance, and they will use other people to achieve their goals.
So it's not so much about like feeling admired or connected to other people.
Right.
It's more about using those people to bolster their own sense of power.
Yeah, and the source gives this really chilling example of a CEO who has ID.
Okay.
And he is constantly putting down his employees, not because they're doing a bad job,
Right.
but because putting them down makes him feel more powerful.
Oh, wow.
He gets validation out of that.
He feeds off of it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to ESFD. Okay.
What's driving their need for approval?
So people with ESFD, they have this inflated sense of self-importance. They think that they are superior to other people.
Oh.
And so they need constant reinforcement of that belief.
Interesting.
But what's really interesting is that deep down,
Yeah.
they're incredibly insecure.
So that outward confidence is almost like a show.
It is.
It's like they're overcompensating for a real lack of self-worth.
Exactly. And they need that constant stream of praise and admiration just to kind of keep that fragile ego in check.
Right.
The source describes it as a house of cards.
Oh.
Any kind of disagreement or criticism threatens to topple it over.
And I imagine they get pretty defensive when that happens.
Oh, absolutely.
That sounds exhausting to be around.
It is.
You know, always having to kind of walk on eggshells and feed their ego.
Yeah.
Okay, what about EID?
Okay.
How do they go about trying to get validation?
With EID, it's all about emotional intensity. Their sense of self is really unstable.
And so they experience these huge emotional swings.
Got it.
And they need that validation as a way to try to soothe that inner turmoil.
So they're almost looking for something external to help them regulate their internal state.
That's exactly it.
It's like they're searching for an anchor in the middle of an emotional storm.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
And the source material ties this back to early childhood experiences.
Interesting.
They say that people with EID may have grown up in environments where their emotional needs were not met.
Ah, okay.
And so they're looking for that stability from external sources.
They're still looking for what they missed out on.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the last personality type here.
Okay.
DASD.
Right.
What makes their approach to seeking validation unique?
Individuals with DASD are attention seekers.
Okay.
They need to be the center of attention in order to feel validated. So things like dramatic gestures, exaggerated stories, maybe even creating conflict just so all eyes are on them.
So they need to be on stage performing in order to feel worthy.
Yes, and without that spotlight, they just feel insignificant.
I see.
The source gives this great example of a woman with DASD
Okay.
who would constantly invent these elaborate stories about her life. And the more dramatic and attention-grabbing the story, the better.
Right.
And when people started to kind of question her stories, she would just make them even more dramatic.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground already.
Here we have.
And it's fascinating how this need for validation can manifest in such diverse ways. It really is a complex thing.
Absolutely. And before we move on, I think it's important to emphasize that these personality types are really valuable insights.
Right.
But it's important to remember that these are broad categories.
Yeah.
Not every single person is going to fit neatly into one of these boxes.
That's a good point. But I think what is clear is that when this need for external validation becomes excessive,
Yes.
it can have a huge impact, not just on the individual, but on their relationships as well.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to explore next.
The ripple effects of this need on the people around the individual.
Okay, so stay tuned for that.
It's going to be a roller coaster ride.
All right, buckle up, everybody. Okay, so we've been unpacking these different personality types.
Right.
And how their need for external validation sort of plays out.
Yes.
Let's shift gears a little bit now and talk about the impact that this has on their relationships with other people.
Okay.
Because I imagine it can get...
Oh, it does. It gets very messy.
Yeah.
Imagine always having to be the one to like reassure somebody,
Right.
prop them up and manage their emotional ups and downs.
Yeah, constantly having to kind of regulate someone else's emotions.
It's draining for friends and family and partners.
It's like you're being tasked with being the sole provider of someone else's self-esteem.
Yes. And the source material describes this as being tethered to an emotional kite.
Oh, wow.
That's constantly dipping and soaring.
Okay.
You're always on alert. You're adjusting your grip. You're trying to keep it from crashing.
And I imagine over time...
Yeah, that can create a lot of resentment.
Oh, absolutely. You start to feel resentful. You feel exhausted.
Yeah.
Hollowed out.
That's such a vivid image.
It is.
You know? Always on edge, waiting for that next emotional swing.
Always.
And I think it's easy to overlook the impact this has on the person who's seeking the validation.
Right.
You know, they might get that temporary boost from that praise,
Yes.
but it's not really a solid foundation.
It's like building a house on sand. You know, it's unstable. It's fleeting.
Yeah, and they're always chasing that next hit,
Exactly.
that next bit of approval, and never really feeling satisfied.
It's a vicious cycle.
So how do you navigate this if you're in a relationship with someone who constantly needs that validation?
Boundaries.
Boundaries, okay.
Yeah, you have to set healthy boundaries.
So how do you start to do that? What's the first step?
First step is recognizing that you are not responsible for someone else's self-esteem.
That's a big one.
It is.
You can be supportive and loving, but you can't be their only source of validation.
Right. And setting boundaries is about protecting your own well-being.
Okay.
It's about communicating what you are and are not willing to do.
So, for example, you might say something like,
I love you, but I'm not comfortable with constant criticism. I'm happy to listen, but I can't give you the reassurance that you're seeking.
right. So it's about being direct and honest about your limits,
Exactly.
but without being judgmental or harsh.
Yes. And remember, consistency is key.
Consistency.
Because if you give in every time they become demanding or manipulative, you're just reinforcing that behavior.
So it's about sending that clear message
Yes,
that you respect yourself and you respect the boundaries you set.
exactly. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is encourage them to seek professional help.
Okay.
Therapy can give them the tools that they need to address those deeper issues.
It can help them really build that foundation of self-worth.
Exactly.
So it's important to have that conversation.
Yes.
But to approach it with sensitivity and understanding.
You're not diagnosing them, you're just expressing your concern.
Right. You're offering a suggestion.
Yes.
This has been incredibly insightful. And I'm curious, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for our listeners so far?
I think the biggest takeaway is that while validation can feel good, it's fleeting.
Right.
And true fulfillment comes from cultivating a strong sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on other people.
I love that. So as we wrap up this conversation, I'd love for you to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Sure.
Something that kind of builds on what we've discussed today.
I want you to think about this. How can we as individuals cultivate that inner strength and self-acceptance? What are the small daily practices that we can engage in to nurture our own sense of worth?
Okay.
And how can we create relationships that are built on genuine connection rather than this constant need for validation?
Those are great questions, and ones that I think we could all benefit from reflecting on.
Yes.
So we've explored this complex world of external validation. We've looked at what drives it, how it shows up in different people, how it impacts their relationships.
Right.
Let's bring it all home now.
Okay.
What can our listeners do with all of this information?
I think the first step is recognizing that this is all about awareness.
Okay.
And, as you listen in, think about what resonates with your own experiences and your own relationships.
Yeah.
And it's not about putting labels on people.
Right.
It's about understanding
Exactly, human behavior.
behavior.
So what's the first step if someone listening is thinking, wow, this sounds familiar?
Start to notice those patterns.
Okay.
The constant need for praise, the manipulation, the drama to get attention.
And once you start to notice those things, what then?
Then you detach.
You detach.
Yes.
Explain that a little bit.
Detaching doesn't mean abandoning the person.
Okay.
It means recognizing that you are not responsible for their emotional state.
Right. You can't make someone feel worthy
You can.
if they don't already feel that way about themselves.
Exactly. And detaching helps you protect your own well-being.
Okay, so practically speaking,
Yeah.
how do you support someone while also protecting yourself?
You set boundaries.
Boundaries.
Yes. And remember, boundaries are about self-respect.
Right. It's not about punishing the other person.
No, it's about taking care of yourself.
So you might say something like, hey, I love you, but I'm not comfortable with you criticizing me all the time.
Exactly.
Or I'm here to listen, but I can't constantly reassure you.
Right. And it takes practice.
It does, because it can be hard to set those boundaries.
It can, especially if you're dealing with someone who is used to getting their way.
So any tips for sticking to those boundaries?
Yeah. Write them down.
Write them down.
Write them down.
Oh, okay.
It sounds simple,
Yeah.
but it helps.
Because it clarifies things for yourself.
Yes.
And it can help you communicate them more clearly.
Exactly.
I love that tip. And it's important to remember that setting boundaries isn't a one-time thing.
No, it's a process.
Yeah.
It's ongoing.
Okay, so we've talked about how to support someone who might be struggling with this need for external validation.
Right.
But what about the people who are listening and thinking, this is me?
Oh, yeah.
What advice do you have for them?
Be kind to yourself.
Okay.
This isn't about judging yourself.
Right.
It's about growth.
Okay.
And the source material really emphasizes therapy as a way to unpack those deeper issues.
So professional guidance can be really valuable
It can.
in terms of developing a healthier sense of self-worth?
Absolutely. And while you're working on that,
Yeah.
start paying attention to your self-talk.
That negative self-talk.
Yes, are you constantly putting yourself down? Try to replace those thoughts with something positive.
Even just saying something like, I am enough.
Exactly. It can make a difference.
So simple, but so powerful.
And another great tip from the source material.
Okay.
Start a gratitude journal.
Oh, a gratitude journal.
Write down 3 things you're grateful for every day.
I love that tip.
It helps to shift your focus to what you have.
Instead of what you lack.
Yes.
These are such great tips.
Good.
Because we're not just talking about ideas here.
Right.
We're giving people things that they can actually do
Exactly.
to make a change.
And remember, this is a journey.
It is.
Be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
Celebrate the small victories.
Yeah.
And keep exploring those things that help you connect with your own sense of worth.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
This has been an incredible conversation.
I'm glad
We've really delved deep into this topic of external validation.
we have.
And I think the most important thing to remember here is that self-worth
Yeah,
is an inside job.
it is.
It's about knowing that you are worthy, regardless of what anyone else thinks.
Exactly.
So a huge thank you to our listeners for joining us today on this deep dive into the world of external validation.
Yes, thank.
We've explored its complexities, its impact on relationships,
Right.
and most importantly, how to navigate these challenges with compassion and understanding.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning,
Yes.
and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of human behavior.